All right, guys, we are back. Thank you guys so much for continuing to watch and participate. It really means the world to me. We're doing another Seeing the World Integrally video. Now, today's going to be a pretty fun video, while also being intellectually insightful, I hope. We're going to be doing a Gebserian critique, if you will. I don't know if Gebserian's a real word, but I'm going to pretend it is anyways. A Gebserian critique of one Mr. Robert Greene. Now, who is Robert Greene? Robert Greene is... you probably heard of him without actually hearing about him. He wrote the 48 Laws of Power. He wrote the book that we're going to be briefly critiquing in this video, The Laws of Human Nature. I will make that point in a second. He is an author. He is a writer. He is a thinker. I don't think he's... I don't think he would describe himself necessarily as a philosopher in the same light as Nietzsche or Kant, but I do think he would consider himself sort of a cultural critic, someone who, in the book that we're talking about, does that, posits laws of human nature, so these sort of, well, we'll get there, these aspects of the human condition that will never go away, and they will never be supplanted or removed. And I think what he's trying to say here is, hey, let's use these, let's get knowledge of these laws and use them for our benefit. So as you can probably tell, the reason why I was interested in doing this in the first place is because him and Gebser are doing something very, very similar. Of course, I hope I don't offend any Robert Greene fans who happen to watch this, or Robert Greene himself. I hope you watch this, by the way. I think you could use a reading of Gebser. I think you, as well as pretty much almost every other thinker that I can think of right now in contemporary times, could use a reading of Gebser. I think it would completely just kind of help you out. I think you and Gebser are doing something very similar, but unfortunately, after you read Gebser, all the mana, if you will, that is imparted to the work here is extracted, because it just simply doesn't compare to Gebser. But don't take it personally, because Gebser is a genius, and you and I are not. So in this video, we're going to be talking about one of the laws, the first law, actually, the law of irrationality, and we're going to be taking a 4D integral irrational perspective and critiquing Robert's work from that perspective. I want to say, if you're, you don't know who I am, maybe you're a Robert Greene fan, you want to hear some critiques, just know I'm not doing this from a perspective of, look how stupid Robert is, look how much of a moron you are, you just don't know anything because you haven't read Gebser. That's not what I'm doing. I have a great respect for Robert. I love the 48 Laws of Power. I even like this book. I think as far as, like, normie self-help books, I've always said this is easily, as far as that kind of stuff, which is to say it's not written by, like, Gebser or Kant or something. It's just written by an intelligent but relatively normal guy. This is as good as you're going to get. By the way, if you're into Ryan Holiday, I don't know why you would be, please put his books down. There is nothing you are going to find in those books that you cannot find in this book. Much, much, much better. The student has not surpassed the master. I'm very disappointed in Ryan Holiday. He says nothing. But yeah, that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be going through the first law, critiquing it pretty thoroughly. I've got a lot of notes here, and this might be a long video, so go grab something to drink, something to eat. And after that, we're going to be going just very quick fire, kind of rapid succession through the laws. We're not going to be doing a detailed critique of every other law, but we're going to try to pinpoint what consciousness structure each law derives from. And that'll be fun too. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So without any further ado, let's get into it, because it's going to be a long video. Okay, so first and foremost, the laws of human nature, we can very clearly tell that Robert is being rational. Why is he being rational? Because the laws. What are laws? The law of irrationality, the law, of gender rigidity, and the law of grandiosity. Well, these are not tangible physical things that we can grab on like my mouse pad here. What are they really? Of course, they're vanishing points, invisible inferred points that confer order, clarity, and depth on what progresses from it. It structures perception. It's an invisible inferred point that structures perception in a way that it confers clarity, order, and depth on what follows from it. There you go. The laws of human nature, the laws of power. Of course, you have the laws of economics, like, say, supply and demand, stuff like that, and then you have the laws of logic. These are vanishing points, of course. These would be the open aspects of the vanishing points. So I know it might sound weird to those who aren't in the Gebser cult, but you being rational is actually a big problem. You need to be irrational. You need to be integral. You need to stop being strictly rational because that's rendered deficient. So we're going to talk about the first. Let's quote the first. I don't know what you would call it. He gives you the law, and then he gives you like a 1-paragraph summary of what it is and how we can channel it forward. So let's read that. Quote. This is Robert, of course. You like to imagine yourself in control of your fate, consciously planning the course of your life as best as you can, but you are largely unaware of how deeply your emotions dominate you. They make you veer towards ideas that soothe your ego. They make you look for evidence that confirms what you already want to believe. They make you see what you want to see, depending on your mood, and this disconnect from reality is the source of bad decisions and negative patterns that haunt your life. Rationality is the ability to counteract these emotional effects, to think instead of react, to open your mind to what is really happening, as opposed to what you are feeling. It does not come naturally. It is a power we must cultivate, but in doing so, we realize our greatest potential. So first and foremost, he is, to a large extent, correct. I do want to give props here. I don't want it to just be this cynical thing. He is correct. And I'll probably repeat this point in the near future, that there are benefits of rational restraint. So, of course, rationality, efficient, healthy rationality, remember, rationality is built on space. Space permeates everything rational. It is the condition that allows rationality to exist in the first place. So what you do is you impose space between you and the object of reflection so you can calmly analyze it. It's very difficult to rationally, calmly, in a measured way, analyze the soccer game when you're playing in the soccer game, because now your internal makeup is directed or seized, if you will, by the automatic instincts. There's some rationality, of course, but it's not this strictly logical stuff. So yeah, I don't want it to seem like I'm just here to rip the guy. He does a good job of that, and I think when it's time to get logical, Robert is absolutely right. We should not be getting emotional, because emotion absolutely can destroy our ability to think rationally, to think logically, and to think reasonably. And again, when it's time to do that, we should do that. There's no arguments here. The problem is, of course, one cannot know when to be rational and when not to be without rendering the structures transparent and understanding time as an intensity. But we'll get there. So when to be rational and not, you're going to have to, first off, render the other aspects of the human condition, which say the magic and mythical structure, which say the pre-rational and irrational, transparent, so we can identify, this comes from this structure, this comes from that structure. And then you also have to have an understanding of time as an intensity. So you are looking at the qualities that permeate or charge the present moment and offer each moment its distinctive stamp. And you ultimately appeal or refer back to this sort of internal field of presence. This has nothing to do with the rational time-ticking nonsense. So in this quote, we can see the obvious rationalism. We're pitting rationality against irrationality. Excuse me. We're pitting rationality against irrationality in a dualistic antithetical sense, and then privileging the former. So we can very clearly see textbook rationalism, right? You took complements that belong to a wider integral whole, you statically divided them, placed them in opposition, invoked the third aspect of measuring thought to privilege one over the other, and of course he privileges rationality over irrationality. So Robert, like all rationalists, think if we can simply supplant irrational thought with rational thought, we'll live in the enlightened utopia where everyone is perfectly reasonable. Of course, the great irony is that, in throwing off the balance, we've created the classic rationalist seesaw. As one goes down, the other comes up. So when you take polar complements, nothing and something, good and evil, rationality and irrationality. Of course, you would also have to include pre-rationality and irrationality, which we'll get there in a sec. And you turn them into dualistic antitheticals. You don't stamp out what you have demoted and get exclusively what you privileged, right? So if you place rationality against irrationality, in which one is privileged over the other, rather than this yin and the yang, where one complements and corresponds to the other, one solidifies the validity of the other. You cannot have one without the other. It's like having the first half of a soccer game without the second. It doesn't make sense. When you do that, the binary or the thing, the entity that you've demoted, in this case irrationality, will always come back with a vengeance because you haven't actually destroyed it. It is an energy, and what happens with energies? They don't get destroyed, they get transferred. So we get the seesaw. As we come down with rationality, irrationality comes up. This is why, in the age of reason, in the Enlightenment, we had the two worst wars in the history of our species. We have the Holocaust. We had the rise of fascism. We had the rise of communism. We had all this terrible stuff. We had the Cold War, maybe even arguably the invention of the nuclear bomb. All this terrible, terrible, terrible stuff. We're going to talk about the real, true, insightful, irrational, integral way of balancing these modes of thought or being. We'll get there in a sec, but you can't do that. You cannot pit rationality against it. It's not perfect, but even if you just did the 2D flat circle, that'd be fine. Because it's not perfect because you're not really taking into account pre-rationality and irrationality, but it's infinitely better than this deficient rationalist nonsense. It's just terrible. Okay, so kind of like I said in my notes, rather than supplanting or replacing the irrational with the rational, what we should be doing is rendering them transparent, recognizing their validity from the perspective of a particular structure. That is what we should be doing. A complete view would allow us to recognize that irrationality and rationality condition and reveal each other. One cannot know what is rational without irrationality and vice versa. Let's recognize their transparent interplay and not pit one against the other. So rather than, kind of like I just said, what we do is render them transparent, recognize the perpetual efficaciousness of these aspects of the human condition, and channel them towards healthy ends. We'll be diving into this more. Of course, being stuck in the rational, Robert cannot see the benefits of what he derides as irrational. No rationalist can. We'll get there. He cannot see the benefits of myth, poetry, or symbol, and how all these are necessary for the individual and collective to thrive. He doesn't recognize that poetry is a history of the soul, and that any man who doesn't account for his own soul is doomed to failure. As a matter of fact, he doesn't mention the soul at all, only as all rationalists label it character. Ask a rationalist what character is, and you'll get a pretty good description of what the soul is. Believe it or not, Robert, there are benefits of the irrational, particularly psychic unity, meaning, bonding between myth, the myth that animates the rational rational actions of the rational subject. Like he said, when he said in his initial quote here, you are largely unaware of how deeply your emotions dominate you. I think we'll be returning to that. They make you veer towards ideas that soothe your ego. So yes, imagine if we could transform these for healthy ends. Let's see. Okay. So what Greene derides as irrational aspects of the human condition have their own benefits, their own logic, and when properly integrated can be channeled for healthy ends. So in this book, he derides envy, which is a law. Of course, envy is obviously a bad thing to the rationalists, but envy is a product of the mythical structure. It is the desire for meaning and place in a shared order. So envy, you have something that is meaningful and significant. Well, hold on now. Meaningful and significance derive from the mythical structure, and the mythical structure is irrational, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but becomes one when it is derided as irrational nonsense that must be stamped out. So rather than seeing envy as this inherently negative thing, well, let's investigate the consciousness structure foundations of this feeling, of this aspect, envy. And now that we have a greater understanding of where it comes from, its own internal logic, now we can transform these for healthy ends, because now it's no longer just envy, is it? Now it's the desire for meaning and place in a shared order. That's not a bad thing. You want meaning and place in a shared order? Yeah, so life can be meaningful, and you can walk around with the salvation of life that isn't just, look how depressed I am because everyone's a cynical nihilist rationalist. You want that. Imagine a life without meaning. I mean, you might as well just commit suicide. Same thing with fear. Fear is a product of the magic structure, a product of the broken immediacy of the world. Under Greene's view, this is something to be stamped out with rationality, which will always fail. It's just a figment of your mind that you just need to ignore. No. This is an energy that is actively conditioning and affecting your decisions, attitude, and behavior, okay? You cannot stamp it out. The point is, stop trying to supplant one with the other and instead recognize that all of the structures are simultaneously present and effectual. This is a very, very important point I'm about to make. So what we're about to do, I'm going to give an example or two about how all of the structures are present and interplay with each other at literally all moments in your life. They only become divided and static when we render them as such through the rational framing. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We need to do that to confer order, clarity, and depth. The problem is when you pause the movie and you pause the hockey game, you have to hit play again, okay, and put them back into motion. So even something as simple as drinking a morning coffee reveals the integral whole. It reveals everything. So the magic, physical, direct connection to the warmth of the coffee cup in the physical sense, of course, that would represent the magical structure. So I'm feeling the cup and I feel directly through instincts, pre-rational instincts, drives, energies, whatever you want to call it, the warmth. It is an experiential presence. I'm tuned in with my automatic functions as a human to my direct surroundings. That's the magic structure. Then, of course, the mythical story of meaning created for the event. So this is my morning ritual. This is what I do to get started. It's a mini myth. It's a individual myth. It's obviously not a myth to the same qualitative degree as Odysseus or the Epic of Gilgamesh or anything like that. But nonetheless, what we have is we've created a story in which meaning is real. The world has meaning in it, as evidenced by the fact that this is my ritual, and I do the ritual because I want to be alert and upbeat so I can seize the day and make the world better for me and my collective. Okay, that's a story that you presuppose. It's a very small one. It's one we don't take very seriously or are even consciously aware of. Nonetheless, it is a story you've created. We're going to talk more about this. And then, of course, the rational clarity of recognizing the ingredients in the preceding science that created this drink. So essentially, now that I have the magical attunement and the mythical meaning that animates why I'm doing this in the first place, now it's up for the mental structure and rationality to come in and order these pre-rational and irrational drives. So, of course, that would mean drinking the coffee in the first place because we know scientifically that caffeine increases energy. So we can very clearly, hold on, and now we have the integral clarity of recognizing that all of these structures are perpetually active and present. They are perpetually effectual. They are always affecting your decisions, attitudes, and behaviors. So that one quick example, I'll give a couple. Let's say, I remember I was at work the other day, and the sun was setting, and it was really pretty outside. So a coworker said, "Did you see how pretty the sunset is?" And I said, "No, I didn't." So she walked out, and I walked out with her, okay? So I'm looking at the sunset, and it is beautiful, I have to say. And think about what's happening here. Every single structure is active, even in this one moment. So, of course, the magic structure is active because I feel an automatic presence, an automatic experiential connection to the sunset in a pre-rational automatic sense, where I'm simply absorbing in the bare physical stimuli that I'm receiving, right? It's affecting me. And then, of course, we have meaning, right? So any meaning that I impart to it or that is revealed in it, that's the mythical structure. So I feel the presence of the sunset. Okay, it's feeling me. Now I come in with the mythical structure and I say, this is beautiful. This is a reminder of the beauty and life. And the fact that it's happening in a sunset is a signal that tells me that sometimes moments of beauty are rare and should be appreciated because of that, right? So what have we done here? We've just kind of presupposed or created a story in which meaning is important. The sunset has become a symbol representing beauty. I am almost a symbol of the good in the world by appreciating and receiving this beauty. There's a story being told that confers meaning and significance on the act itself. It animates why I even appreciate it at all. And then, of course, we invoke the mental structure to do something rational and order this. And what did I do? I took my phone and I took a picture because I wanted to look at it again. So we can very clearly see all the structures active in that moment. And then, of course, integral consciousness allows us to be aware of this. So next thing when you click off this video and you go take a shower, think about all the structures active in your decision-making right there. The structures are constantly conditioning one another and constantly affecting each other, and they are perpetually present and active and dynamic. They are not static, still things where you can pit them against each other and say, ha, rationality is going to supplant irrationality, and once that happens, irrationality will have no way of affecting or conditioning our rational thoughts. That's bullcrap, okay? Okay, so now we're moving on to a new quote. Quote, What was perhaps the strangest quality of Pericles, he tells a story about the importance of Pericles and how using rationality propelled him to not only affect events individually but collectively. What was perhaps the strangest quality of Pericles was his speaking style, restrained and dignified, emphasis on restrained. He did not go for the usual flights of rhetoric. Instead, he worked to convince an audience through airtight arguments. This would make people listen closely, as they followed the interesting course of his logic. The style was compelling and calming. I think you know where this is going. First and foremost, of course, when he says Pericles, the time frame he's referencing is 432 BC to about, or 463 BC to about 432 BC in ancient Greece. You know what I'm going to say next, right? This is, whether he realizes it or not, there is a reason he appealed when talking about rationality to ancient Greece. Why? Because that's the pre-perspectival phase. This is what you see a lot of this with the political right. The political right, think your Victor Davis Hanson, Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, not your idiot neighbor, but the more intelligent versions. They're always referencing Greece because they're very rational, and the Greeks were very rational. So they're always referencing Greece. So there is a reason, Robert, that you mentioned Pericles, and you did not mention the Egyptians, you didn't mention the Chinese, you didn't mention any of these guys, because they're in the magical mythical structures. There is a reason. You are unaware of these sort of primordial forces at play, so you think it's, well, I don't know if you find any connection in this. There's a reason for it. It's all part of a vast game. And it's also the same reason as to why Pericles was so successful. His logic was bound to land on fertile ground based on the fact that the ancient Greeks were the first one to, the first one in which the incipient mental structure rigidified in their collective unconscious. It was them, it was that group that first became rational. Of course, when you're working with the efficient energies and powers of a new structure, and that structure is rigidifying itself in your civilization, well, yeah, of course, if I just make a strictly rational argument, I don't even need to appeal to the magic and mythical structures in this particular moment, because those are now deficient, and now we have this efficient thing that my subconscious, if you want to call it, that recognizes and then works with it. So, of course, he referenced the Greeks because it was the pre-perspectival phase, and of course Pericles was successful because it was the pre-perspectival phase. Yes, you are working with the mutation, the new mutation of consciousness structure. You are non-consciously aware of this, and I don't want to say you got lucky necessarily, but it all is part of a vast spiritual game. It's not as simple as Robert is making it. So the problem with Robert's little theory here is that even if I were to grant you that everything went like this rosy little story you create, which I don't think it did, but even if I were to grant you that, the problem is we aren't in that time anymore. We're in the time of the internet, not the book. Now, of course, if you watch this series, you know in my first episode, or second episode maybe in this series, we talked about how the internet is the medium that both encapsulates and promulgates the new structure. It is a manifestation of the new structure, and it also carries it, entrenches it in our culture, in our society, in our world. Great. The problem is the instant access, ready at any time, availability, the noise, literally and figuratively, emanating from the internet, and this sort of integral point of convergence function necessitates that we are not going to be more rational or more receptive to purely rational arguments. Okay, why? Because one, the noise is a huge problem. Noise gets in the way of our ability to think rationally, almost literally and figuratively. What was the other point I made? Two, the integral aspect, the point of convergence, well, that presupposes we're not just being rational anymore, but we're integrating with other aspects, so the pre-rational and the irrational. And what was the point I just made? Oh, yeah, and the instant ready at a moment nature of the internet, unfortunately, when you think, let's take Kant, for example. Kant had to spend almost an entire lifetime imposing space between him and the object of reflection to very calmly, in a measured way, think these things through. The point is he had space and time to do so. That's gone with the instant access nature of the internet. And I think it's interesting that Robert Greene hates Trump. I ask you, Robert, do you think Trump was nominated on purely logical arguments? I don't think you do. I like the guy, and even I don't think that. It's absurd. No one in Biden, Obama, Trump, Bush, any of these guys, they've all adapted to the new mediums, either television, which is entertainment. These guys speak in terms of sound bites that are meant to go viral, or the internet with the exact same thing. So, unfortunately, it may have worked for Pericles in the pre-perspectival phase when we were working with the efficient powers and energies of the new structure, but we are in a new structure now that necessitates new demands and new tasks, so unfortunately, strictly rational logical arguments will never work in 2025. As a matter of fact, as an integral thinker, you need to balance or integrate all the, as he calls them, flights of rhetoric. Yeah, you need to be appealing to the magical pre-rational, the mythical irrational, the mental rational, and the integral irrational. Every single one. Yes, that is true. No amount of calling it flights of rhetoric is going to change that. Okay. Oh, I wrote in my notes, yeah, do you think Biden was elected based on purely logical arguments? I don't think he was. I don't think he could spell logic. I think if he tried to put a logical argument out, he'd probably have a conniption. Okay. So, quote, as Pericles surveyed the political scene early in his career, this is funny, he noticed the following phenomena. Every Athenian political figure he believed he was rational, had realistic goals and plans on how to get there. They all worked hard for their political factions and tried to increase their power. They led Athenian armies into battle and often came out ahead. They strove to expand the empire and bring in more money. And when their political maneuvering suddenly backfired, or the wars went badly, they had excellent reasons for why this had happened. They could always blame the opposition or, if need be, the gods. And yet, if all of these men were so rational, why did their policies add up to so much chaos and destruction? Why was Athens such a mess and the democracy itself so fragile? Why was there so much corruption and turbulence? The answer was simple. His fellow Athenians were not rational at all, merely selfish and shrewd. What guided their decisions was their base emotions, hunger for power, attention, and money. And for those purposes, they could be very tactical and clever, but none of their maneuvers led to anything that lasted or served the overall interests of democracy. So I disagree with almost every conclusion reached by Robert here. So the Athenians failed, not because they weren't being rational enough, but because they were being too rational. The Athenians' battle plans and strategies were strictly 3D, that is, limited and confined to space without a proper understanding of time as an intensity. They created a limited system and imposed it on reality and stuck to the plan no matter how much the present moment begged them to switch strategies. A strong military leader does not dogmatically impose a system that cannot meet the qualities of the present moment, but first recognizes the qualities and then employs the proper system. So it is time for a full frontal. Is it time for a full frontal attack, or should we be sneaky? Is it time for snipers, or is it time for infantry? When our systems are implemented and unforeseen events cause us to reconsider our plans, do we employ a new strategy or do we dogmatically stick to our spatially conceived plans? They were being too rational and should have been less rational in favor of a more irrational integrality. So what you've done is you took a mode of thought that is already limited. It's already limited to the quantifiably measurable and consciously known. Not only that, it is further limited and confined to nothing but space. Extensity. It cannot take into account intensity. So when you had your plans, and as you say, went badly, the wars went badly, or things suddenly backfired. Hold on. We'll get there. Yeah, because you're working with a limited mode of thought, and then you're imposing this projection, by the way, onto reality, and now you're shocked when this mode of thought that can only take into account the external aspects and presupposes a purely rational subject on the other side, it doesn't work because you didn't take into account the pre-rational, irrational aspects and energies of your enemy in this case. So your plans failed. You were too rational. You did not... Human beings are not the personification of the laws of logic, and I know that for a fact because you just said in your quote here, what guided their decision was their base emotions, hunger for power, attention, and money. Okay, so it sounds like these things are interconnected and they interplay. So what we don't do is take the whole, which constitutes, in our case, let's say 4 parts: the magical, the mythical, the mental, the integral, maybe even the archaic, okay? What you don't do is take that, render them static, divide each one from each other, and privilege one over all 3, and then run to me crying when the plan you created with this one consciousness structure, this part that you've taken for the whole, don't come crying to me when it fails. They were being too rational. They were not being not rational enough. It's absurd, the idea that you could do this. It's just absurd. Here's another thing. The excellent reasons for their demise are probably valid, quite frankly. He doesn't offer us any reason specifically. So rationality is limited and cannot account for black swan events, which I know Robert has talked about, and thus, when black swan events occur, they are blamed. So what do we do when a black swan event? So we have a plan that can only work if all the swans are white. We're fighting in our war. I turn to my left, and suddenly there's a black swan. I have a few options here. I can, rationally, recognize that my previous plan is now been rendered deficient and useless because the qualities of the present moment, which is to say time as an intensity, which is to say the thing that needs to complement our 3D spatial systems, demand something new. Okay, that is to say, the qualities of the present moment demand a system that can account for this black swan. Okay, so what do? Do I recognize the connection between space-time and come up with a new plan that is more effective and that can be channeled for healthy, successful, virtuous ends? Or do I act like a rationalist, like the ancient Greeks, and pretend it doesn't exist, continue to impose my 3D system that relies on only white swans, and then come crying to Justin when it doesn't work? What do you think we should do, Robert? I think we go with the former. That's my idea. This is the benefit of not just a purely spatial system, but a space-time system. External combined with the internal, not just external. All right. We'll move on to another quote. In his conception, the human mind has to worship something, has to have its attention directed to something it values above all else. For most people, it is their ego. For some, it is their family, their clan, their god, or their nation. For Pericles, it would be nous, the ancient Greek word for mind or intelligence. Nous, hold on one sec. Nous is a force that permeates the universe, creating meaning and order. The human mind is naturally attracted to this order. This is the source of our intelligence. First of all, I think it's very interesting that Greene concedes that the human mind, or just the human, I should say, the human needs something to worship, but goes on to claim that most people worship their ego, and that most people should worship nous in the mental sense. That is, of course, nous, if you follow my Seeing Through Gebser series, we know that nous originally meant of the heart. In accordance with the mythical structure, it only became of the mind in accordance with the mental structure, which of course privileges the mind, the brain, the intellect. Very interesting. And Greene, unfortunately, is simply flat wrong when he says most people worship their ego. In truth, most people worship a deity or some spiritual other side, and they've been doing so since essentially this evolution of consciousness began properly. Those who worship their ego are merely rationalist Westerners who account for maybe 3% of the total allotted time of our species. And that seems like a high number. And so no, most people don't. Go to India. Why don't you go to India and tell me that most people worship their ego? Yeah, good luck, buddy. You're going to get laughed out of the building. No, they worship their spiritual cosmologies, just like I do, just like people in the West are going to with the rise of integral consciousness. It's got nothing to do. The only people who worship their ego are rationalists, respectfully, like you, Robert, and like me when I used to be one. We are an exception, so and you're just flat wrong on this. Rationality, nous, will never... So pretty much everything I said about the spiritual cosmologies, of course, Robert would derive this and dismiss this as irrational nonsense. I remember in this book he said that there is no God, there is no spiritual other side on the end. You are flat wrong about that. You employed rationality to determine that conclusion. Rationality is limited to the quantifiably measurable and consciously known. It can't even account for the irrational and pre-rational aspects of our human condition, let alone the spiritual other side, if you want to call it that. That is absurd. You are a rationalist, and I will not take you seriously. miss me with that nonsense. Robert, if you're watching this, respectfully, rationality will never be able to reach the spiritual other side. You are trying to snipe God, but instead of a sniper rifle, you're using boxing gloves, and you're saying it can't happen. No, find a sniper rifle. So all that irrational nonsense, all that spiritual cosmology stuff, that's irrational. We can't do that. Unfortunately, it's an aspect of the human condition that needs to be respected, and is probably more potent than even the mental structure. So rationality, or nous, as he calls it, will never be able to adequately meet this hunger for meaning. Why? Because the meaning we need derives from the mythical structure and can only be met by it. The mental structure cannot even properly understand the soul or any other meaningful aspect of the mythical structure, let alone adequately compensate for it. Again, these structures are not static and divided from each other, but condition each other. So the vision of a world without cancer, we'll say, that's the mythical structure, a sort of vision or image of a better world, creates the desire to master the rational natural sciences, which would be the mental structure, of course. So we can see how the mythical structure conditions and affects the mental structure. They are not divided and separate. This is all to say that the irrational need for spiritual meaning should not be stamped out, but rendered transparent and channeled for healthy ends. So that's a great thing. So that's a good example. Having the image of a better world, well, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's what we all want to do. So now that we've recognized that this is essentially an irrational, mythical aspect of the human condition, don't try to stamp it out. Channel it for healthy ends. 2. Notice the connection between rationality and order, all in alignment with the connections between rationality and perspectivity. It's not that this order isn't important or real, it's just not everything. And no, not everyone is attracted to this mental order. Only those for whom the mental structure has mutated and properly rigidified. See Africa, if you disagree with that. See parts of Central America, and see parts of the Middle East. No, not everyone cares about order. A lot of these guys are lost in deficient. Take like an ISIS terrorist. That dude doesn't care about order. You think that dude cares about order? That dude cares about order insofar as his God tells him this is how the world should be ordered. He doesn't care about anything else other than that. He's in the deficient magic mythical structure, baby. But of course, you can see the direct connections between Gebser's understanding of rationality and Robert Greene's invocation of order. Order is one of the values that is privileged in the rational way of relating objects to each other. Robert, please read Jean Gebser. You will understand this far greater than you do right now. And of course, this order, as we are living through in 2025, thank you, left-wing American politics, has been non-consciously realized to be contingent. So this objective order that the rationalists like to go on and on and on. It's not objective, my friend. It's contingent upon the exclusive validity of the mental structure. We are non-consciously realizing that validity simply doesn't exist. And if you disagree, I'll point you to postmodernism as a great example. Now, I hate postmodernism, obviously, but the point still stands. They have non-consciously realized that, no, this rational stuff is not objective. Another big point with Robert here is what he's doing is he's essentially holding up rationality as like the end-all be-all of how to get reality, how to prevent us from falling into our deficient collectivist aspects, the deficient aspects of the magical and mythical structures. Unfortunately, Robert, you are unaware. You are a rationalist trying to close the door, but a door has been opened, and that's the 4D irrational integral world. That is the way forward. That is the new efficient structure. Has nothing. I have no idea why you would appeal to the same structure that is the problem in the first place. I'm not going to appeal to a 3D system and a 3D way of doing things exclusively if I recognize that we're now in a 4D world. That would be suicide. Finally, the force that permeates the universe, Greene's definition of nous, is just the mental structure. That's all it is. It's not a force that permeates, it's the mental structure. If you want to say it's a force, it's a spiritual force, and that's going to counteract your rationalism. That's really what Robert's gesturing at here. He's indirectly gesturing, just like many people, at the mental structure. It's a strata of the collective unconscious. That is what he is getting at. It's got nothing to do with this sort of force of logic kind of permeating the world. Also, incidentally, I would recommend, Robert, if you're watching this, to take mythology more seriously, because he does admirably and adequately mention the myth of Athena, and it is relevant, and I do appreciate you taking the time to take at least this myth seriously. The problem is this myth is more than just a myth, my friend, and rises almost to the level of a systatic element. If you had read Gebserian, if you had been doing this sort of 4D irrational integral, you would realize this is not just a random myth, my friend. This is a sign of this is evidence of an incipient consciousness structure, a new mutation in the collective unconscious. And that, of course, is going to have extremely powerful implications. So, just think about these things. Quote, in essence, Athena stood for rationality, the greatest gift of the gods to mortals, for it alone could make a human act with divine wisdom, unquote. 1. Rationality is not the greatest gift of the gods to mortals. It's not even the efficient mode of realization at the moment. We are an integral 4D irrational. It is not. The preceding structure that has now been rendered deficient is by no means the greatest gift of the gods to mortals. This is what I was saying earlier when he said it seems to be that rationality is like the end-all be-all of like human existence. It's ridiculous. At best, it comes in second, and even that's debatable, and maybe even a sign of deficient rationalism to try to pit these against each other in privilege. That's at best, and at best it's terrible. So no, I fully reject this idea. Irrationality and pre-rationality are equally great gifts, and both are present, as well as rationality, in literally every moment of our lives. You wouldn't be able to get through a single day without the integral whole constituted by these parts. Think of the coffee example. Think of when you're in your car driving. You think you want to have the automatic machinations and functions of the magic structure? I think so, because you don't want to drive off the cliff. All right, quote, to cultivate his inner Athena, Pericles first had to find a way to master his emotions. Emotions turn us inward, away from nous, away from reality. We dwell on our anger or our insecurities. If we look out at the world and try to solve problems, we see things through the lens of these emotions. They cloud our vision. He, Pericles, decided to base all of his political decisions on one thing, what actually served the greater good of Athens. Oh boy, my goodness. First of all, you don't master your emotions. That's ridiculous. If you want to master them, you render them transparent, allowing you to recognize their influence in the moment. The efficacious interplay between the structures and a dynamic flux. That's how you master your emotions. You don't master them by rationally supplanting them. It's ridiculous. Recognize that irrationality is an energy, and energy can never be destroyed, only transferred. So the laptop example, the meaning I impart to my action of typing out these notes, let's say, or perhaps whatever meaning is revealed, comes from irrationality. So why am I even doing this video in the first place? Why did I create notes for this video, and why am I doing this video? Well, simply put, I'm about to tell you a story because I think I do it to make the world a better place. So think about the myth presupposed in that, right? The world fights, there's a better or worse sort of polar complementarity at play. The world kind of floats in between these two things, and the world is better when we act more virtuous and we share knowledge, right? This is myth. This is a narrative, and I become a symbol, if you will, of a sort of paragon or transmitter of this virtue and goodness. There's a little mini myth that I just created here. That's the reason. So the reason why I even care about things in the first place is because I tell essentially a myth that essentially pictorially or imagistically represents the intangible forces that constitute the pre-rational and irrational that affect me. That's really what I'm doing here. This myth animates my desire to be rational, which is to make notes that are orderly and to do this video in an ordered way. We can see the interplay here. It's a good thing, you know, that the desire, if you will, is in many ways irrational. It's just the story. You're not doing it through strict logical deduction, rational proof, logical syllogism. It's a story you tell. So the story I tell myself about why I'm doing this is exactly that, a story or myth. And the story I tell myself directly influences my rational behaviors. So there you go. So no, we don't privilege the rational over the irrational in an attempt to supplant one with the other, but recognize their perpetual efficacy, render them transparent, and channel them for healthy ends. So now that I recognize that myth, the mythical structure, sort of animates my rational actions. Well, hold on now. Now that I'm consciously aware of this, now I can manipulate my myth. Well, do I have a good myth? Do I actually want to is it good to make the world a better place? What if I wanted to make the world a more just place, a more fair place? The point is we can manipulate these, consciously change them, and in doing so, channel them for healthy ends. So yes, you live by a myth. Do not try to supplant them ever. Our society runs on myths. Our individual actions run by myth. And I've also made a connection, by the way. So take postmodernism, right? And you can, the efficacy, the interplay between the structure is evident in postmodernity. So what postmodernity do, they essentially enact a full mental skepticism, where they essentially, well, how is that true? Why is that true? Why is that true? And essentially what they've come up with is, at the very end, at the foundation of the truth claims, they claim that the rationalists, if you will, always appeal to a meta-narrative. What is that? A meta-narrative? That sounds like a product of the mythical structure. So they might say something like, well, how do you know that's true? And why is that true? And why is that good? And you might say something like, because we're all God's people, and it is our job to carry the human spirit forward, right? That's a myth that animates your ability, that animates and affects your rational actions, right? So what they've done is exactly that. They've taken the mental structure and they've negated it entirely, and what they found at the very bottom of that is that there's an interplay, a connection between the mythical structure and the mental structure. So behind, if you will, or underlying, or directly affected by all of these rational proofs, logical syllogisms, scientific theories, all this stuff, behind that is this sort of myth of, let's say, the desire to be a good person, or the desire to make a world a better place. So I think what they're getting at is the mental structure is connected to the mythical structure. So, unfortunately, the postmodernists are too stupid, and they haven't read Gebser to understand that this isn't necessarily a problem. What they've touched on is the integral whole. That's not a problem, but they've made it a problem because they said, look, the foundation of the mental is in the mythical structure, so therefore, all of the mental is just stories and fantasies, essentially. It's not actually real. It's not actually true. That's obviously dumb, but they have touched on something, the interplay between the structures. Quote, emotions turn us inward, away from nous, away from reality, unquote. We can see the obvious rationalism on display. Reality is reduced to a part, the quantifiably measurable and consciously known, as well as the external, and is treated as the whole. So when he says emotions turn us inward, away from nous, away from reality, no. Believe it or not, the totality of your internal state is just as real as the external world, my friend. It's just that Robert Greene can't measure it, so it's as if it doesn't exist. Think about what he just said. Turn us away from the external reality, which is to say the external quantifiably measurable and consciously known, and towards the internal quantifiably immeasurable, irrational, pre-rational aspects of us. I understand they can't be neatly measured or charted, and they can't be rationally accounted for, and they evade rational capture. Unfortunately, I don't care. You've made the, what do they call it, the ontic fallacy, where they reduce all of what is to what can be seen. That's what you've just done. It's a little silly. The soul, psyche, and thoughts of an individual, amongst other things, are very real, and reality must encompass them if we want to finally free ourselves from the destruction wrought by rationalism. So, simply put, just because it can't be rationally measured doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It is reality. It just can't be measured. Also, rationality cannot get you closer to reality because, since Einstein, we've known that the rational way of relating objects in the world to each other is ultimately a projection. We've known that. The second Einstein irrationally united space and time into space-time, because, of course, the rational way is the one or the other, triangular thought, right? Space and time, these are separate, placed in dualistic, antithetical opposition. The second that was united in an irrational integral way, rather than a regressive irrational way, we're done. We're done with rationality. It's a projection. It's not done with it entirely, but it has been revealed to be a projection by the ego. to think that rationality could get you closer to reality than irrationality is to posit the idea that perception filtered through a now deficient projection will yield better results than seeing through said projection and just describing reality as it is, whether it follows the rules of logic or not. So what do you think is going to get me closer to reality streamlined, pure reality streamlined into my goddamn veins? Filtering my sense perception of reality through a now deficient projection, or just tossing the projection, seeing through it, and describing it? I think the latter is going to yield better results. So it's the great irony here is you're appealing to rationality as being the mode of thought that is most likely to get you to result in a higher degree of understanding of reality as it is, unobscured by emotional projections and stuff like that. The great irony is you just relied on a projection. That's the great irony. You've held up rationality as like the end-all be-all. It's not even objective. It's a projection. Quote, if we look out at the world and try to solve these problems, we see things through the lens of these emotions. They cloud our vision. I was waiting for this point. I'm going to repeat for emphasis because it's important. If we look out at the world and try to solve problems, we see things through the lens of these emotions. They cloud our vision, unquote. This sounds to me like an implicit admission of the interplay between rationality and irrationality, as well as pre-rationality. If emotions cloud our rational vision, it sounds like they both belong to a complementary integral whole that is constantly conditioning and affecting each other, rather than these static, set, divided things that barely touch each other. Perhaps we should render them transparent, recognizing their influence on us in our decision-making, and channel them for healthy, virtuous ends. Sorry for being a little repetitive. I'm just trying to get these into your head. Yes, if emotion clouds our ability to think rationally, then yes, that presupposes that they are interplay. They connect each other. They condition. Quote, he, Pericles, decided to base all of his political decisions on one thing, what actually served the greater good of Athens, unquote. To be clear, the desire to serve the greater good of Athens, the highest value, does not come from rationality or logic, but the mythical and magical structures, the pre-rational drive towards the greater good. That is magic structure. It sounds rational because it's been streamlined through the mental structure. It is not. The greater good of Athens, what the hell does that mean in terms of rationally? Right? Rationally, we're going to take these terms, we're going to render them static, we're going to assign definitions that are objective, so it can only apply to that word and all of its uses, and then we can go. Unfortunately, you're never going to find an objective, measurable, rational definition of the greater good, whatever the hell that means, from a rational perspective at least. It's just not going to happen. I don't know what to say. What your greater good is going to be so different from my mom's greater good. How is that objective? That's not objective at all. That is you rationally clothing a pre-rational desire. And that pre-rational desire is imbued with meaning and significance and narrative through the mythical structure. So I think it's funny that he says, base all of his political decisions on one thing, what actually served the greater good of Athens, when you're appealing to something that is not rational at all. You did not employ the triangular thought to get there. You did not employ the quantifiably measurable and consciously know way of doing things to get here, because there is no quantifiably measurable greater good. It just doesn't exist. It's a qualitative valuation, or just the rationalization of a pre-rational desire. The great irony is you're claiming the benefits of rationality, and you're just stealing the work from pre-rationality and giving credit to rationality. No, it's not going to happen, my friend. So this desire, right, let's say to serve the greater good for Athens, it can come from that pre-rational desire combined with a vision or images of a brighter future. That's the mythical structure. Like I said, it's got nothing to do with strict rational syllogisms or logical rational proofs or logical syllogisms, because it just doesn't. Qualitative valuations of the good and evil, that's a mythical structure, baby. Rationality pits good against evil and privileges the former, but the polar complements existed prior to this framing. Also, incidentally, he gets this is incidental, by the way. He talks about how the '08 stock market crash was a product of irrationality. It wasn't at all. What it really was, it was the product of, I think it was called the Frank-Dodd Act, and what that act did is essentially force traders to make bad loans to people of particular ethnic groups. And if they didn't do that, then they would be sued under disparate impact, and they would have to shut up shop. So it was actually very rational to make a bad loan if it and incurring this minor cost if it means preventing this greater cost. It's got nothing to do with irrationality. And you could say, well, the politicians made an irrational plan. Nah, not really, because they were rationally responding to their incentives. Their incentives is to get votes. Their incentives is not to let the economy just kind of do its thing and let people who with the most knowledge, interest, and experience in their circumstances do their thing in a free market. That's not going to get you votes. What's going to get you votes is a bunch of idiot Bernie Sanders coming around here and just promising a bunch of free shit, doing rent control, doing all this dumb stuff. So you can say it's irrational for them to create that law. Not really, because if the people, the voters, are too stupid, which we are, to recognize that this is obviously going to have negative consequences. No, it's actually very rational. I want to look out for my own self-interest to stay elected. So yes, I'm going to rationally appeal to the irrationality of others. So, quote, emotions originate as physical arousal designed to capture our attention and cause us to take note of something around us. They begin as chemical reactions and sensations that we must then translate into words to try to understand. But because they are processed in a different part of the brain from language and thinking, this translation is often slippery and inaccurate, unquote. This is a very shallow rationalist reading that cannot take into account the immeasurable spiritual principle of origin and the evolution of consciousness. That emotions, quote, originate as physical arousal designed to capture our attention only appears that way to the mental structure, to the mythical structure. The mythical structure would never, ever, ever account for emotions in this cold, strict, quantifiably measurable way, not even close. Irrational thinkers, on the other hand, who have rendered the structures transparent, recognize these emotions as having their own internal logic inside the mythical structure and cannot be reduced to the shallow understanding of the mental structure, which is to say what Robert just gave us, this idea that, oh, they're just designed to cause us to take note of something, and that everything gets reduced down to this brain activity and chemical neurons. It's just absolute bullshit. Love alone has inspired some of the most heroic, virtuous, and impressive acts in the history of our species. That's just one emotion. It certainly has. There's certainly more to emotion, like take love for, as we just did, for example, than sensations causing arousal and to cause you to take note of something. No, actually, I think love, meaning, emotion, the mythical structure has led to some of the greatest acts of sacrifice and beauty and virtue that our species have ever seen. So no, we're not going to take emotions, which probably constitute a majority of immeasurable stuff, reduce it to the 5% that's measurable, which is, say, their physical, chemical, neurobiological origins, and then pretend that little part is the whole. It's dumb. Quote, we do not have conscious access to the origins of our emotions and the moods they generate, unquote. Please just read Gebser. Please read Gebser. It's just bullcrap. It's just bullcrap. You can know exactly where these emotions come from. For example, entitlement, which he talks about in this book. You know where entitlement comes from? It comes from the unity of the magic structure. Now, this is just my own theory, so, maybe you disagree. The magic structure, magic man, someone who is working only with magic structure, not even the mythical structure had mutated, let alone the mental. The magical man, through sheer birthright, is the beneficiary of a unified world. He has been given a unified world where everything is unified and emanates magical forces. Everything is whole and unified. As the structures mutate, and particularly the mental structure, and as we impose space between us and the world, and rather than unifying everything, we divide everything up, well, what was unified and whole and given to us in the first place through sheer birthright now has been taken away from us. So we had this great unified whole that conferred all this psychological contentment. Now it's been taken away through the rational way of doing things. So now those energies have been transformed into entitlement. It used to be a good thing because it signaled a connection and deep appreciation of the world. But with the structure, and because rationality is so limited, it only interprets it as entitlement. It does not necessarily come from a bad place, okay? So please read Gebser. Also, his point about the differences between the reptilian, mammalian, and neocortex is essentially just a shallow rationalist understanding of the structures. It's exactly what you do, Robert, is take this and take it seriously and stop doing this rationalist nonsense. You can get into the immeasurable stuff, okay? The physical entities, the physical strata of the brain that we just talked about, the only reason they exist at all is because they are a quantifiably measurable, spatialized externalization of its polar complement, the immeasurable spiritual principle, that is to say, origin. They're essentially just externalizations of origin, which is an immeasurable spiritual sort of agent. Quote, progress and technology have not rewired us. They have merely altered the forms of our emotions and the type of irrationality that comes with them. Unquote. Yes and no. You got it backwards. So it's not that technological progress rewires our internal constitution, but the spiritual rewiring of the internal constitution by origin creates our technology. So remember my example. Take Richard David Attenborough. I can't remember what his name is. I remember watching one night. It was like I can't remember what it was called. It was something like The Wide World of Sound or The Magical World of Sound or something like that, right? And it hit me like a fucking bolt of lightning. What was the organ of emphasis of the magic structure? It was the ear. The ear was the sort of portal, the window into the hums and hymns and the sounds that provided Magical Man with crucial information that would allow him to navigate the magical world for effective ends. But as the mythical structure mutated and the organ emphasis shifted from the ear to the mouth and the heart, and then, of course, the mental structure with the eye, well, hold on now. So this advanced audio technology, where does that come from? Is it that we created the technology and that rewired our internal constitution? No. The creation of advanced audio technology is our modern contemporary way of reattaining the privileging of the ear in the magic structure, right? So we already had, before technology was even a word, let alone an actual thing, the ear was privileged in the magic structure. Once that was gone, and we have a very non-conscious familiarity with that, we're trying to reattain the privileging of the ear, and we do that through audio technology. And of course, you would do the same thing with myth with the microphone I have here. This is an oral technology that is designed to revive the organ of emphasis of the mouth. So there you go. You got it backwards. It's not that the technology rewires our internal constitution. It's our internal constitution creates the technology by being rewired. So technology helps us balance those natural capabilities that we have already lost. Quote, it is important to understand that rationality is not some means of transcending emotion. Pericles himself valued bold and adventurous action. He loved the spirit of Athena and the inspiration she brought. He wanted Athenians to feel love for their city and empathy for their fellow citizens. What he envisioned was a state of balance. We'll return to this. A clear understanding of why we feel the way we do. Conscious of our impulses so that we can think without being secretly compelled by our emotions. Pericles wanted the energy that comes from impulses and emotions that serve our thinking self. This was his vision of rationality and our ideal. Woo. All right. Now we're talking, baby. So this is much better. This is much, much, much better. But it's still not great. It falls into some rationalist traps, and I'm not going to accept it, unfortunately. But you went from giving me 13% on the test to a 54. So now we're making substantial. It's not good enough, but it's getting better. So we don't necessarily want to balance rationality and irrationality like weights on a scale, but render them transparent, as with the examples noted earlier. Think the coffee example, the sunset example, all these examples that I talked about. One, there's more than just the rational and irrational. So there's the pre-rational and irrational. So even if you did want to balance them like weights on a scale, this is a rational way of doing things, you would have to include these other things. So that's number one. Two, it's not about being 50-50, 60-40, 70-30 or anything like that, but recognizing how these energies and aspects affect you and interplay with each other. We let magical presence and connection, mythical meaning, and rational clarity all speak when the moment calls, not supplanting one with the other. So what we do is not balance them in the sense of just kind of doing this weight on a scale stuff. What we render them transparent. And once we render them transparent, we can see how they're affecting our decisions, attitudes, and actions. And once that happens, then we can balance them in the sense of saying, look, the mythical structure, the irrationality, it's not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to be able to supplant it, but I can bring it down a little bit and keep it more in alignment with the other structure. Same thing with rationality. It's not that I'm going to be able to get rid of rationality or supplant it by mythical irrationality, but I'm being a rationalist right now. So I need to tone it down a little bit. So in that sense, there's a balance here because everything is within its limit and everything is affecting each other healthily. But it's not balance in the sense of now it's time to be rational, now it's time to be irrational. You are always being both irrational and rational, as well as pre-rational and irrational. Render them transparent, and you will become a superhuman, my friend. But it should be noted that the intention is much better here, Robert. So I want to give the man some props. I don't want to just critique the hell out of him. But this is much better. We're improving. Unfortunately, though, there's still a problem here. This little quote that I just read about balancing, it completely contradicts everything you've written in this chapter. Rationally mastering, as you talked about, irrationality through ego-willing and rational restraint doesn't meet even his own definition of balance, the rationalist view, let alone any integral definition. So the integral definition is what I just described. The rational definition of balance is this sort of 50-50 weight on a scale stuff. If rationality masters irrationality, then even amongst the rational weighing of the scales, even that, it doesn't even meet his own definition, because one would be heavier than the other. So either way, but let's give him his props. I want to end this section off with giving the man his props. He does a good job of deconstructing deficient irrationality, and I think that's important. He also does a good job of expounding the benefits of rational restraint. There is a benefit of, obviously, having a healthy degree of stoicism. You don't want to, especially, it'd be one thing if these irrational and pre-rational aspects were like purely efficient, then you'd have a better argument, but they're not. They're just as deficient as rationalism nowadays if you're non-consciously just working with them. So no. There are many benefits of rationality, and Robert understands this. Most rationalists do. I will say, the rationalists are very good at explaining the benefits of rationality. They overstretch, definitely, as made evident in this video, but they are generally pretty good. He's on his way to integral consciousness and time as an intensity, though I think he's too rationalist to get there without the assistance of Gebser. In fairness, Robert, if you're watching this, nothing personal. I was also that way. I needed Gebser's help too. So now we're going to move into the last section. I'm going to try to speed this up. It's a very long video. I knew this was going to be a long video. And we're going to be explaining the structure foundation of the laws. So we're going to go through all the other laws, 2 through 18, and this is going to be very quick. We're not going to be doing an hour-long breakdown of each law. That would be insane. But we're just going to try to pinpoint the consciousness structure foundation of each law. So now law number 2, transform self-love into empathy, which is the law of narcissism. So clearly touching on the visceral, automatic, experiential presence of the magic structure, as well as the deficient aspects of the mental ego. So self-love into empathy. Empathy relies on the automatic instincts and energies of the magic structure. You are almost telekinetically feeling pre-rationally what the other person is feeling through instincts, through emotions, stuff like that. That's clearly magic structure. And then, of course, the mental ego. So self-love, that's when perhaps I think the way Robert's using